Hello, welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why, and how of newspaper reading. Today, we are going to discuss the important news appearing in the New Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper dated 13th August 2019. The news to be discussed has been presented on the screen, and timestamping for the same has been provided in the description box below. So, let's start our today's discussion. The first news appears on page number 5. It says, from Assam to Chhattisgarh, a maiden 1500-kilometer journey for wild buffaloes. 5 females to be translocated to Raipur to revive the waning population of the endangered species in central India. This news highlights about the translocation of 5 female wild buffaloes from Assam to Chhattisgarh, that is mainly from the Manas National Park in Assam to Udanti Wildlife Sanctuary in Chhattisgarh. Now, in your prelims examination, this topic becomes a part of general issues on environmental ecology, and in your mains, it gets covered under GS paper 3, specifically with respect to conservation. The central government is planning to translocate these wild buffaloes from Assam to Chhattisgarh mainly to revive their declining population and also to expand its territory across states, because the population of wild buffaloes in northeast only accounts for 92% of its population around the world. So, according to the government, the survival hazard of inbreeding, continuing lineage, as well as increasing male population of these wild buffaloes have become one of the major reasons for their translocation. Now, in the Udanti Wildlife Sanctuary, only 9 wild buffaloes are left, of which 3 are females. So, the habitat of these wild buffaloes in central India mainly depends on first, hassle-free translocation, successful breeding, and placing these wild buffaloes in different habitats across India. Now, there were various concerns expressed by some of the scientists with respect to the translocation of the wild buffaloes from northeast to central India. So, based on this reservation, their genetic samples, that is, genetic samples of wild buffaloes from northeast and that from central India, was approved by the Center for Cellular and Molecular Biology in Hyderabad. So, based on this report, the scientists are now also considering the viability to translocate more wild buffaloes to other sanctuaries to increase their population in central India. Now, there's another aspect with respect to their translocation is that around 20 to 25 wild buffaloes of Indravati National Park, which is in Bijapur in Chhattisgarh, often travel across the state to Kola Marka Conservation Reserve in Gadchiroli, which is in Maharashtra. So, based on this frequent travel of these wild buffaloes across states, scientists are also considering to release the progenies of these wild buffaloes in other areas in central India in future. So, these are basically the purpose for which the government is planning for translocation of these wild buffaloes. Now, with respect to these wild buffaloes, which is also referred as Bubulus arni, it is mentioned under Schedule 1 in Wildlife Protection Act 1972. It is described as endangered in the IUCN Red List, as well as it has been also mentioned in CITES, as you can see here. So, these are important aspects about wild buffaloes with respect to your prelims examination. Now, these are the locations of Udanti Wildlife Sanctuary, which is in Chhattisgarh, as well as Indravati National Park, which is again in Chhattisgarh near Bijapur. So, it becomes important for you to remember with respect to maps. As you can see that Udanti Wildlife Sanctuary, where these wild buffaloes will be translocated from Assam, is close to Orissa border. And also the fact that we had mentioned that these buffaloes at times travel across states to this Gadchiroli Forest Reserve. So here is Indravati, and they travel across the state, that is from Chhattisgarh towards Maharashtra to this Gadchiroli Forest Reserve. Hence, these maps also becomes important with respect to our prelims examination. The next news appears on page number 8. It says, Wildlife Sanctuary set to expand boundaries. Now, this move was necessitated by diversion of land for DRDO facility, that is Defense Research Development Organization. Now, this news highlights that the Forest Department has identified 308.84 hectare of revenue land for inclusion in the Krishna Wildlife Sanctuary. And this inclusion of land in the Krishna Wildlife Sanctuary has been recommended by National Board for Wildlife as a compensation for other land which was diverted to DRDO to set up a missile test launch facility. 154.42 hectares were the total forest land which was diverted to DRDO to set up a missile test launch facility. And of these 154 acres, 45 acres fall into the Krishna Wildlife Sanctuary. So, to compensate for this land, the National Board for Wildlife has identified 308.84 hectares of revenue land to be included in the Krishna Wildlife Sanctuary. Now, in your prelims examination, this topic gets covered under general issues on environmental ecology, as well as in your mains. It gets covered under GS paper 3, specifically with respect to conservation. Now, talking about National Board for Wildlife, which has recommended the inclusion of this forest land into Krishna Wildlife Sanctuary, it is a statutory organization and is constituted under Wildlife Protection Act of 1972. It says that this board serve as an apex body to review all wildlife related matters and approve projects in and around national parks and sanctuary. Important point to be noted is that National Board for Wildlife is chaired by the Honorable Prime Minister and its vice chairman is the Minister of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. Now, another important point to be noted from our prelims perspective is that this board is a large body having 47 members, and these members includes members from Parliament, NGOs, eminent conservationists, ecologists, as well as environmentalists. Further, it also includes government secretaries of various departments, chief of army staff, director general of forest, tourism, etc. So we understand that this board comprises of people across sectors. Now, Krishna Wildlife Sanctuary was declared as a wildlife sanctuary in 1989 and it is spread across Krishna and Guntur districts in Andhra Pradesh. Krishna Wildlife Sanctuary is located at a distance of 80 km from Vijayawada and is situated on the estuary of river Krishna. As you can see in this map, it is here where this sanctuary is located. Now, the sanctuary is also a part of mangrove wetland in Andhra Pradesh and is located in the coastal plain of Krishna Delta. Now, this map highlights the Krishna Delta and it is on the estuary, that is where this river Krishna discharges its water into the ocean. This entire Krishna Wildlife Sanctuary is situated. Now, estuaries are partially enclosed body of water formed where fresh water from land mixes with the salt water from ocean. So here the estuary is formed where the Krishna river flows into the Bay of Bengal. Now, estuaries are among the most productive ecosystems in the world. Many animals rely on estuaries for food, places to breed, as well as migration stopovers. Now, because of the brackish water, that is a mixture of fresh water draining from the land and salty sea water, estuaries are home to unique plant and animal communities that have adapted themselves to this brackish water. Now, estuaries also serve as an area which provides economic, cultural, and ecological benefits to the communities. Now, estuaries also deliver important ecosystem services. Now, it says that ecosystem services are fundamental life support processes upon which all organisms depend. And two ecosystem services which estuaries provides are water filtration and habitat protection. It also highlights the reason for productivity of estuaries. It says that it is because of the water filtering through these estuaries, it brings in nutrients from surrounding watershed. And watershed or a drainage basin is an entire land area that drains into a particular body of water like a lake, river or a estuary. It further highlights that these estuaries are also some of the most fertile ecosystems on earth because it brings important nutrients along with the water flow from land. Another important aspect about estuaries is that estuaries and their surrounding wetlands are also buffer zones as they stabilizes the shorelines and protect coastal areas, inland habitats and human communities from floods and storm surges from hurricanes. So these estuaries and wetlands also act as a buffer zone with respect to protection of shoreline, coastal areas, inland habitats and human communities from the vagaries of flood as well as hurricanes. Now, in this news analysis, you must know about National Board for Wildlife, about Krishna Wildlife Sanctuary, as well as the functions of estuaries, and also because it is one of the most productive ecosystem in the world. The next news appears on page number 9. It says, no toxic chemicals in PET bottles. CSIR study concludes that metals and chemicals were below direction limits. So this news basically says that evaluation done by CSIR, Central Food Technological Research Institute, which is located in Mysore, has declared that PET bottles are safe for human use. Now, PET stands for polyethylene terephthalate. Now, in this news analysis, you must know about CSIR, Central Food Technological Research Institute, as well as its functions, and also about PET bottles, that is polyethylene terephthalate. Now, in your prelims examination, this topic forms a part of your general science, and your mains gets covered under GS paper 3, specifically under science and technology. Now, there has been a general debate going on internationally on whether these PET bottles, which are mainly used for making plastic bottles and disposable food containers, can leach harmful chemicals when exposed to high temperatures. And it was based on these international debates that researchers from CSIR Central Food Technological Research Institute went ahead with the analysis of PET bottles and found out that these were safe with respect to human uses. Now, PET, that is polyethylene terephthalate, is a form of a polyester, just like the clothing fabric. Now, PET is extruded or molded into plastic bottles and containers for packaging foods and beverages, personal care products, as well as for other consumer care products. Now, PET is a polymer of ethylene glycol and terephthalic acid. The researchers at CSIR collected 4 different kinds of PET containers and exposed them to different materials. It was exposed to ethanol of different concentrations, acetic acid, as well as vegetable oil. Now, these PET bottles were subject to high temperature of 40 degrees Celsius and 60 degrees Celsius, as well as certain test chemicals were also stored in these PET bottles for 10 days. Along with the metals, scientists also measured the amount of terephthalic acid, isophthalic acid, ethylene glycol, as well as bisphenol A. So, after these experiments, the scientists at CSIR concluded that antimony, arsenic, barium, cadmium, chromium, cobalt, lead, mercury, selenium, and zinc were below their detection limits of 0.001 milligram per kg. It further said that even bisphenol A was below its detection limit of 0.02 milligram per kg. It also says that BPA, that is bisphenol A, was also below the European Union regulation norms of the specified migration limit. So, it was because of these experiments and the conclusion that scientists at CSIR concluded that these PET bottles are safe for use. Now, with respect to bisphenol A, it highlights that it is a synthetic organic compound and it is used in the manufacture of PET bottles. However, it is now being phased out after a research found a link between the presence of bisphenol A and disruption of hormone regulation as well as breast cancer. So, we understand that any amount of bisphenol A above a significant limit is also responsible for cancer as well as disruption of hormone regulations. So, these are the important aspects which you must remember with respect to PET bottles. Now, with respect to CSIR, Central Food Technological Research Institute, which is at Mysore, it mentions that it's a constituent laboratory of CSIR, that is Council of Scientific and Industrial Research, New Delhi, and it came into existence during 1950 in order to research in areas of food science and technology. So, basically, the Central Food Technological Research Institute researches in areas of food science and technology, and it functions under the Ministry of Science and Technology. Now, this becomes an important aspect from your prelims perspective. The researchers of this institute broadly researches on the following areas, namely engineering sciences, technology development, translational research, as well as food protection and safety measures. So, these are some of the important aspects with respect to Central Food Technological Research Institute, which you must remember, and it functions under the Ministry of Science and Technology. The next news appears in the article section on page number 11. It says, Rooting Artificial Intelligence in Ethics. A technology should be evaluated both on the basis of its utility and the intention of its creator. Now, the topic highlighted in this article forms a part of GS Paper 4 under Ethics, Integrity and Aptitude, as well as GS Paper 3. This article has highlighted the ethical aspect of use of artificial intelligence, and the discussion of this article emanates from this particular chapter of Ethics, Privacy, Security and Artificial Intelligence with respect to a discussion paper of Niti Aayog on National Strategy for Artificial Intelligence. Here the author says that understanding and discussing ethical basis of artificial intelligence is important for India. It further highlights that the Niti Aayog is ready with a 7,500 crore plan to invest in infrastructure of artificial intelligence. It says that the transformative capability of artificial intelligence in India is huge and must be rooted in an egalitarian ethical basis. And any institutional framework for artificial intelligence should have a multidisciplinary and multi stakeholder approach and have an explicit focus on the ethical basis. So, we understand that the author in this article has tried to highlight that the government must focus on the ethical and egalitarian basis for the use of artificial intelligence. The author, to stress his point on use of ethical basis for the artificial intelligence, he has highlighted egoist, utilitarian, theological as well as deontological perspective with respect to use of artificial intelligence in day-to-day administration. So let us understand these different perspectives with respect to the views of the author. The egoist perspective highlights that we take actions which results in greatest good for oneself, and the forms of egoism is basically based on the idea of self-interest. Now, utilitarian perspective is basically based on result oriented perspective. Now, utilitarianism is a form of consequentialism because it rests on the idea that is the result of actions, laws, etc. that determine whether they are good or bad or right or wrong. So basically, as per utilitarian perspective, whatever is being evaluated, we must choose the one which will produce the best overall result. So basically, our choice must depend on the one which gives us the overall best results. Thus, from this perspective, we must choose the option that maximizes utility or that policy which produces the largest amount of good. And both egoist and utilitarian perspective together forms the teleological perspective. Now, teleological perspective is basically consequence oriented. Now, teleological perspective is described as an ethical perspective that contends the rightness or wrongness of an action is based solely on the goodness or badness of their consequences. So, basically, the teleological perspective is focused more on the consequences. And in strict teleological interpretation, actions are morally neutral when considered apart from their consequences. So, as per teleological perspective, it considered that actions are morally neutral. Another important point to be noted is that ethical egoism and utilitarianism are example of teleological theories as they both are based on consequences. The ontological perspective refers to an ethical theory or perspective based on duty or obligation. So, according to deontological perspective, a duty-based theory is seen as having moral duties or obligations as an intrinsic or inherent value in themselves, and they need no further moral justification. Thus, deontology falls within the domain of such moral theories that guides and assess our choices of what we ought to do. That is, what we should morally do. So we can say that teleological perspective depends on ends and deontological perspective also takes care of the means, that is, ways to achieve such ends. So it is based on these theories the author in this article has highlighted the ethical flaws in artificial intelligence and mentions that artificial intelligence is mostly based on teleological perspective rather than on deontological perspective. Now let us consider the ethical flaws as suggested by the author with respect to use of artificial intelligence. Now it says that it has very limited perspective. On limited perspective, as we have already mentioned, that according to the author, artificial intelligence is based more on teleological perspective rather than on the deontological perspective. That is, artificial intelligence focus more on ends rather than on means. And because of this, it does not take into account the interest and concerns of the minorities. Now, the author has highlighted about this limited perspective of use of artificial intelligence with respect to facial recognition system. It says that the facial recognition system of Google in United States was given a go-ahead in spite of the fact that it could not recognize the faces of minority African Americans. And here the author says that such an approval was based on theological perspective and not on deontological perspective. Now, with respect to teleological perspective, the author says that artificial intelligence was able to recognize the faces of dominant Caucasian Americans and hence was able to bring about the greatest benefit for the greatest number. Now, this is with respect to the utilitarian perspective. And we understand that both egoist and utilitarian perspective are also examples of teleological perspective. So here the focus was more on achieving the greatest benefit for the largest number, which in the case of America was dominant Caucasian Americans. So we understand that by following the utilitarian principles or utilitarian perspective, it is the minority which gets impacted the most. The author says that had this artificial intelligence evaluated on the basis of deontological perspective, that is on the basis of means, then it would not have got green signal or it would not have been approved, since the intention of artificial intelligence was to recognize people from all races and not necessarily the dominant races. So the author in this article has highlighted the use of facial recognition system as an example to highlight that how governments focuses more on ends rather than on means. Now, with respect to limited data, the author has said that in the field of law enforcement, the success of artificial intelligence depends on its ability to harness huge amount of data in order to predict the results correctly. Now, to harness huge amount of data requires that these data are fed into the system which is complete, unbiased and non-partisan. So use of artificial intelligence is basically done through computer algorithms where data is fed into the system and the system based on various parameters fetches an output. Now in order to have a fair system, the article highlights that the data which is fed into the system must be completed, unbiased and non-partisan. That is, there should be no discrimination with respect to feeding of data into the system. Now, the author explains this through an example. He says that, for instance, a person can end up being labeled as threat to public safety if limited data based upon skin color is used to train artificial intelligence employees to identify criminals. Now, this forms an example of discrimination based on a particular data set. Now, another ethical flaw highlighted by the author is with respect to sanctity of the data which is required to train officials with respect to artificial intelligence. It says that the data fed to the artificial intelligence or the system which is based on computer algorithm should be unbiased and non-partisan and free from personal prejudices of those who has compiled the system. So here the author says that the data used to train artificial intelligence employees may get compromised because of the flawed mental models of human beings. Now here the author highlights that every human being carries certain prejudices or conjectures with respect to their thinking pattern, and these prejudices and conjectures should not get incorporated into the system which analyzes these data. Now even Niti Aayog in its discussion paper on National Strategy for Artificial Intelligence has discussed about this conundrum of ethical use of artificial intelligence. The report says that based on the premise that a large set of well-diversified data may be an accurate description of the world, most of the developer community takes technocratic attitude that data-driven decision making is good and algorithms are neutral. The report further says that this argument does not recognize the fact that the existing data may have biases which may have got reinforced over time, and the issue of fairness is at the forefront of discussion in academic, research and policy forum. And this biasness which at times creep into the system definitely needs or merits a combined dialogue and sustained research to come to an acceptable resolution. The report says that one possible way to approach this would be to identify the inbuilt biases and assess their impact and in turn find ways to reduce the bias. Thus, this report highlights that there is a need to remove bias as well as prejudice which may become part of data interpretation models and the need to remove such inherent bias. Now, Niti Aayog highlights about black box phenomena in its report. It says that certain data is input into the system analyzes this data on various parameters, and based on the analysis, there is an output based on different parameters. So the black box phenomena basically says that what happens within the system, nobody knows. So the whole idea of black box phenomena is to find out what actually happens within the system once data is entered into it. It says that presently most artificial intelligence solutions suffer from what is commonly known as black box phenomena, with very little or no understanding of what happens in between and only the input data and results being the known factors. So here the black box phenomena talks about what actually happens once the data is fed into the system. Because only two factors are known. One, that is the data which is fed into the system, and an output data based on the data which is fed. So here again the artificial intelligence is based more on teleological perspective rather than on deontological perspective. That is, it is based more on the output or ends which is achieving rather than the means they have adopted to achieve such end. It says that this is due to the reliance in most current artificial intelligence system to incrementally improve the performance, that is the output, as defined by narrow set of parameters. So it is the output which matters, and this output is based on certain narrow set of parameters. So the issue here is that the developers who have made this algorithm are less interested in how the algorithm are working and more interested in the requisite success of this artificial intelligence system. So as per Niti Aayog report, it is hopeful that with increasing use of artificial intelligence, there will be a time when there will be a need for discussion of deontological use of artificial intelligence, that is based on means adopted to achieve certain ends. Thus, it is in this backdrop that you should know about this black box phenomena, as such an event can be asked either in your prelims examination or in your mains examination. Thus, this article becomes extremely important from your mains perspective. The next news appears on page number 1. It says, decision on Kashmir does not affect LAC, that is line of actual control. Delhi tells Beijing. Measures aimed at better governance, says Jai Shankar, Minister of External Affairs. Minister of External Affairs Jai Shankar stated that these legislative measures to divide the state of Jammu and Kashmir into two union territories were aimed at better governance and socio-economic development. And the statement was given to Chinese interlocutors, referring to India's decision to revoke the special status of Jammu and Kashmir and creating the union territory of Ladakh. Now, this topic forms a part of current events of national and international importance in your prelims examination, and in your mains gets covered under GS paper 2 with respect to India and its neighborhood relations, and in GS paper 3 under security challenges and their management in border areas. China has opposed the decision to take away the special status granted to Jammu and Kashmir under Article 370 and to divide Jammu and Kashmir into two union territories of Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh, and have said that India had continued to damage China's territorial sovereignty by unilaterally modifying the form of domestic law. In response, Indian government has clarified that administrative changes in Ladakh will have no implication for India's external boundaries or the line of actual control with China. As you can see in this map, that this is the line of actual control between India and China. So there is a boundary dispute between India and China with respect to the area of Aksai Chin. Based on this boundary dispute, India has said that a fair, reasonable and mutually acceptable settlement will be reached based on the 2005 political parameters and guiding principles agreement reached between India and China. In addition, Government of India has strongly asserted that whatever decision it takes with regards to Jammu and Kashmir, it is an internal matter of India. In this backdrop, let us also understand the Ladakh border dispute between India and China. It says that the boundary dispute in western sector, in particular to Aksai Chin, pertains to the Johnson Line proposed by the British in 1860s, which extend up to Kunlun Mountains, and this put Aksai Chin in the princely state of Jammu and Kashmir. So the government of India used this Johnson Line and claimed that Aksai Chin was a part of Indian territory. However, China did not accept to this fact. So China, after its invasion of Tibet, stated that it had never accepted the Johnson Line and therefore claimed Aksai Chin. So this became a matter of dispute between India and China. Now Aksai Chin was strategically important to China and began building a new road through Aksai Chin, which connected its Xinjiang province with Tibet. So when India saw the road during the late 1950s, it opposed Chinese road extension into Aksai Chin, and this led to the 1962 Chinese War, where China attacked India and militarily occupied the Aksai Chin region. So this is the historical backdrop with respect to Ladakh border dispute between India and China. Now as you can see in this map, it highlights the western border between India and China, the middle border between India and China, as well as the eastern border between India and China. With respect to western sector, it says that with 2150 kilometers of border, the two sides differ over boundary line that separates Jammu and Kashmir from Xinjiang province of China. And India has accused China of illegally occupying Aksai Chin and some other parts of the Ladakh region. The 1962 war saw fierce fighting between the two sides here. Now the middle sector of this border stretches to 625 kilometers. It says these are the least controversial of the three areas, and Himachal Pradesh and Uttarakhand abut the boundary. Both sides do not have much disagreement over this area. Now, the eastern part of the border between India and China, it is 1140-kilometer long boundary and is contentious and is historically referred as the McMahon Line, which again Chinese do not accept because the McMahon Line was agreed to by the Tibetan representatives, and China claims the whole of Arunachal Pradesh, which is around 85,000 square kilometer, as its territory. So India and China fought fiercely in this sector in 1962, but a better prepared Chinese had the advantage. So these are the issues with respect to India-China border disputes in the western sector, that is in the western region, and in the eastern region. Another point to be noted is that India and China have a total boundary of around 4050 km and divided into three sectors. The erstwhile state of Jammu and Kashmir, Uttarakhand, Himachal Pradesh, Sikkim, and Arunachal Pradesh share their borders with China. Thus, these aspects becomes important with respect to your prelims examination, especially with respect to McMahon Line, as well as the boundary dispute between India and China with respect to Aksai Chin following the Johnson Line. Now, based on our discussion, these forms your practice question for the day. What you can do is to take a pause of 5 seconds. First question says, which of the following pairs are correctly matched? First, Udanti Wildlife Sanctuary, Chhattisgarh. Yes, this is correct. Second, Indravati National Park, Maharashtra. No, this is incorrect as Indravati National Park is also in Chhattisgarh. Third, Gadchiroli Forest Reserve, Telangana. No, it is situated in Maharashtra. So here, option D becomes correct, that is 1 only. Practice question number 2. Consider the following statements about National Board for Wildlife. First, it is created through an executive order of Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. No, it is a statutory organization created under Wildlife Protection Act of 1972. Second, it is chaired by Secretary, Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. No, this is also incorrect as it is chaired by the Prime Minister of India. So here again, the correct answer is D, that is neither 1 nor 2. Question number 3, it says, consider the following statements. Krishna Wildlife Sanctuary is situated on the estuary of river Krishna. Yes, the statement is correct. Second, estuaries also provide ecosystem services. Yes, this statement is also correct. So in this, both 1 and 2 becomes correct. Question number 4, black box phenomena can be related to. Options are civil aviation, smart city, artificial intelligence and education. So here the correct answer also becomes C, that is artificial intelligence. With this, we come to an end to discussion of today's newspaper. Let's move on to the question for the day.